So, over the past few years, we have seen the idiotic ideologies from places like New York City and San Francisco, just to name a few, that have led to policies which end up inflicting chaos and harm on their citizens with rampant crime, violence, and murder. For example, let's take a look at a recent shooting incident on the New York City subway, which involved a confrontation between two men and a woman that escalated into a physical altercation, with one man winding up critically wounded. Now, this incident took place on a northbound A train as it approached the Hoyt-Sherman-Horn station in downtown Brooklyn during the evening rush hour back on March 14th. About 10 to 15 minutes before the shooting took place, a 36-year-old man entered the Nostrand Avenue subway without paying his fare and got onto the A train. Police say the altercation began after a younger man, a 32-year-old male, got on the train at Nostrand Avenue. He was then approached by the 36-year-old man, who was acting aggressively and in a provocative manner. The two men began arguing and then fighting. At one point, the older man had the other pinned down and was delivering a series of blows when he was stabbed from behind by a woman who appeared to be a friend of the younger male. After he was stabbed, the 36-year-old man asked, "Did you stab me?" before pulling a gun from his jacket and asking again, "You stabbed me, right?" while the crowd ducked down and tried to flee the train. The younger man then managed to wrestle the gun away from the older man and fired multiple shots at the older man, once in the neck, once in the chest, and twice in the right side of the face, critically wounding the older man. The 32-year-old was then taken into custody before he could leave the platform, and a small caliber firearm was recovered from the scene. However, as of now, the younger man has not yet been charged with anything. The woman, meanwhile, did flee the scene, and the police are now searching for her. The older man was then taken to Brooklyn Methodist Hospital in critical but stable condition after undergoing surgery. Now, this incident is a stark reminder of the social decay that is crippling this once great city. Incidents like this have been enabled by the city's determined slide into regressive policies that do not punish criminal behavior and, in fact, encourage lawbreaking by making it easier for those who engage in it to remain on the streets even after being arrested. And all because politicians felt the need to bend the knee to the social justice crowd. So how did it all come to this? Well, we can trace it back to the Defund the Police campaign, the movement which gained momentum following the murder of George Floyd back in 2020, which led to calls for police budget cuts and the reallocation of funds to social services. But the calls to reduce funds for the police department was only just one part of this. For example, in New York City, despite claims of defunding, the NYPD's budget was only reduced by 2.8% from $5.6 billion in 2019 to $5.4 billion in 2022. However, the rhetoric surrounding the movement had an enormous and demoralizing effect on the police officers for the NYPD, which contributed to an exodus from the force and a subsequent increase in crime rates. Now, you would think this would have been obvious, that the increase in crime rates would be the inevitable fallout from the reduction in police officers. And, by the way, the increase in crime is particularly bad in poorer neighborhoods. For example, we have East New York, Brooklyn, where the total crime rate is 88% higher than the national average, with a violent crime rate of 279% higher than the rest of the U.S., Your chances of being the victim of a violent crime in East New York are 1 in 23 people. 1 in 23. Another example would be East Harlem in Manhattan, where the average violent crime rate is about 1,616 people per 100,000, and the overall average crime rate is about 4,554 people per 100,000. The chance of being a victim in East Harlem is about 1 in 22. Now, this is just a couple of examples, but there are many others. The poorest neighborhoods have paid the greatest price here. And it's not just defunding of the police, mind you, but also the absurd and idiotic bail reform that New York City undertook. You see, bail reform in New York, which took effect back in 2019, eliminated the use of cash bail for most misdemeanors and some nonviolent felonies. The intent was to address the inequity of detaining individuals pre-trial simply because they could not afford bail. However, opponents of the reform argued that it has led to repeat offenders being released without sufficient deterrent, contributing to the rise in crime, which of course it did. But naturally, people like those from New York City Civil Liberties Union are defending this so-called reform, stating that it is essential for upholding due process and has not been shown to contribute to an increase in crime. Now, these stupid regressive reforms naturally led to an increase in violent crime. And the subway system, for example, has seen a huge uptick in violent crimes, including shootings, stabbings, and assaults. Felony assaults in the subway system have jumped by 15.5%, and there has been a notable increase in grand larcenies, which is up about 17.8% from the previous year. These incidences have contributed to a general sense of disorder and fear among subway riders. And so naturally there would be a response from the state and city officials. We can't have this, right? So now we've got Governor Kathy Hochul, who announced a plan to deploy 750 National Guard members along with 250 state and MTA police officers to subway stations to conduct bad checks. This initiative is part of a broader 5-point plan to improve subway safety, which also included installing surveillance cameras inside conductor cabins and on platforms, improving coordination between MTA officials and district attorneys, and proposing legislation to ban individuals convicted of transit assaults from the system for 3 years. However, critics of this latest move have pointed out the absurdity of relying on the National Guard for public safety after having neutered the NYPD from doing their job of protecting the citizens of the city, and all at the same time, the corrupt New York City prosecutors have been going after those who either defend themselves or others, much like the former Marine Daniel Penny from Long Island, who is being charged with second-degree manslaughter after attempting to restrain a mentally ill homeless man known as Jordan Neely, who is acting aggressively and making threats towards other passengers. You see, Daniel, with the help of 2 other passengers, restrained the man, while Penny put him in a chokehold. Neely was later found unconscious in the subway car and was later pronounced dead at a hospital. The cause of death was determined to be compression of the neck. Now, many have hailed Penny as a hero for his actions, while others have condemned the use of lethal force and have called for accountability and have demanded that he be punished. The reality is, the city of New York, thanks to its horrible policies and the severe limiting of one's abilities for self-defense without the risk of also winding up in prison, should be a wake-up call for everyone there. The sickness of horrible policies and rapidly decaying culture within our urban centers in places like New York City is a desperate cry for help. But sadly, the political and social corruption within these places appears to be making the prospect of turning this around anytime soon a remote dream at best. What is needed here is both a focus on fixing the crumbling social norms of these places and a firm stance on quelling criminal behavior. If you don't enforce laws, there will never be peace. We can see this, of course, with the drama at the border. We just rampantly let people criminally crossing our border day and night and nobody cares. What do you expect the average citizen in the U.S. to think when laws really don't seem to matter all that much, depending on which political side of the aisle you happen to be on, depending on what day? But that being said, it's not just out on the streets where we have a problem. We also have our jail system, which here in the United States is a complete and utter abomination. Not only have we had long-standing overcrowding issues, but the violence in jails is a pervasive issue. It is way too common for inmates to face assault, rape, and other forms of violence while incarcerated. This environment of fear and danger undermines any efforts towards rehabilitation and most certainly has contributed to mental health issues among inmates. The culture within prisons fosters conflict and violence, turning facilities into places where criminal behavior is reinforced rather than reformed. The experience of violence and the harsh conditions within jails has a profound impact on our inmates, affecting their mental and physical health and hindering their chances of successful reintegration into society down the road. Exposure to violence in prison has been linked to higher rates of recidivism and maladjustment, and it is suggested that rather than deterring crime, incarceration in such environments probably contributes to a cycle of reoffending, which kind of seems like a no-dud to me. Frankly, all of this is entirely unacceptable. Those who run these prisons need to also be held accountable, as well as the politicians who refuse to fix this corrupted, bloated prison system in our country. But of course, as a man on the internet having this conversation with you all, I only get to sit here on the sidelines and pontificate about what I'm seeing. The solution to these problems can be achieved, but only if people have had enough and demand change. And whether or not that's going to happen, Well, only time is going to tell. And that, my friends, will bring our episode to a close once more. From the To Be Frank show, I am Adrian. Thanks for watching as always. I'll see you all next time.